Hello YouTube, Sean again. This is the second video I recorded today, mainly because I feel guilty about the time in between videos, so I'm recording another one. And, well, I'm just gonna talk a bit about history, I guess, since I'm here. I did once make a promise to talk about medieval battles, and I will try to do that. And if I don't have time to finish this one, I'll do it in another video. Right. Well, a medieval battle. Well, when I talk about medieval battle, I mean taking place from 500 AD to 1500 AD, or ACE if someone prefers AD or ACE, whichever, in Western Europe. That basically means modern day France, England, Germany, Spain, all in Western Europe. And for a long time in the Middle Ages, those countries weren't known as those countries. For a good portion of the Middle Ages, modern day countries were split up into small, sort of individual kingdoms. There was, of course, quite a few empires throughout that time, and the city of Rome during that time was always a single state. Even though it was frowned upon by the Pope during that time to have war between Christians, they still did it a lot. Typically, in a medieval army, you would find, depends on the type of army you're talking about. There's the old type of army, like the Vikings and the Saxons had, which basically consist of men with large shields, which consisted of the front ranks, and men with large axes called the Dane axe. And the armies weren't too organized at that time. There weren't like certain types of soldiers for the most part. There was just different types of warriors, and they didn't really plan it that well. Kind of disorganized sort of army. And then there was the continental type of army, where there was like a set role for certain soldiers, and each soldier in a different type of role was trained specifically for that. Like there was spearmen that were trained as spearmen, archers that were trained as archers, cavalry which was trained as cavalry, and so on and so forth. Most medieval continental armies consisted of knights, archers, men-at-arms, which were footmen, professional footmen. There was pikemen. Well, pikemen were later on, but you had spearmen wielding spears. You had archers and sometimes crossbowmen, even though crossbows weren't really developed into the later medieval period. And typically in a medieval battle, a majority of medieval battles were sieges, though they're sometimes less recorded in history because most people find a big battle to be more interesting. However, most of the battles were sieges, and so what a siege is kings would build castles all over their country and places they had invaded, and if you wanted to control a country, you needed to take the castles, otherwise they would send out their garrisons to attack your rear while you're busy attacking like an army or a capital. So for the siege, you had men outside the castle, men inside the castle. And the men outside would try and take the castle. They wouldn't charge at it like some movies depict. They would wait. They would have siege engines, which is catapults, trebuchet, which is a sophisticated catapult that's more powerful and also more permanent. You had battering rams, which is basically ram, which is basically a big log of sorts carved to a point, which is underneath, which is built into a wheeled sort of canopy with walls on the side. You go up to the gate or the wall, whichever was easier, and you just bang away at the gate till you carve a hole or break through the gate, and then you go on and kill everybody. And a few times they would have siege ladders. Really, really long ladders for daring men to climb up on the walls. Of course, both sides of a siege would have only a limited amount of time to have said siege. The defenders will have like a limited supply of food and water and fresh supplies. Also men. The men besieging the castle, they have to hurry up because there's a possibility of reinforcements arriving at the castle to relieve the men within, and so you had to take the castle as quickly as possible. But for the most part, sieges were waiting games, because the men inside are behind high, thick walls and are not coming outside willingly. So you have to get in as quickly as possible without destroying the castle in most cases. So you had to plan it well. And the medieval battles that weren't sieges were sophisticated things with archers. The archers would usually have a fortified position, and for most of the medieval period, the kings would use knights in their army, which, if you don't know what a knight is, it's basically a lesser nobleman trained in the arts of war and politics, who often had the best armor of the day, and rode horses for a good portion of the Middle Ages, and were the equivalent of the modern day tank. Of course, the English, starting with Henry V, primarily had archers, and longbowmen to be exact. Of course, longbowmen are specific to England, and I apologize if this is confusing. I really do. I will try to make another video later on describing the specific countries and what types of soldiers they had once I do a bit more research. So basically you have two armies that are, say, a quarter-mile apart. This army has 1,000 soldiers. This army has, say, 3,000 soldiers. As is the case with many battles from our history, numbers do not always win a battle. If the army with the least amount of soldiers is, say, near the banks of a river, they cannot retreat, but also their rear cannot be attacked because there's a river there. And if they keep their important things and people near that river, they're less likely to be taken. And, well, they have multiple options. They can line up their archers and pick off as many enemy soldiers as possible, while spearmen or pikemen defend them, or they can send in their infantry in the main fort, like full frontal, and send their cavalry to flank the enemy. It all depends on the terrain, the people commanding the army, the strategies they have, how loyal the men are, because men on the battlefield would sometimes run away, or as they call it, a rout, basically running away from battle. So if a commander has the correct strategy and the right men for the job, there's a good chance he'll win the battle regardless of numbers. Say if an army of 5,000 men were facing an army of 50,000 men, that would be quite different. In that case, there's not much they can do besides have a really good terrain and hope there's reinforcements on the way. But that's not always the case. In Henry V's case, he beat a much larger army of knights with longbowmen. Longbowmen were trained from an early age, since roughly 7 years old, the same time that a knight was trained from. So these were professional archers, rather than most cases they would have like peasants trained as temporary soldiers in a good portion of armies just to fill up numbers. And the longbowmen were absolutely devastating. When they had it at a specific angle, the range was 600 yards, which is freaking incredible. Straight forward, like pointing that way on the field, like straight up, aiming forward, it's about 80 to 100 yards, which is again incredible range. What they would do is have it at roughly this angle. I'm not sure which one, but it's pretty close to this. And they would usually send up a massive volley of arrows and just devastate the army. And remember, in a medieval battle and some modern battles, you don't need to kill someone to take them out of the battle. If an arrow hits a man in the leg, unless there's a field surgeon about, he's not going to be very effective in a fight. Or say an arrow impales his arm. Say his like shield arm or sword arm, then he can't use that in the battle. So he's less effective. Of course, injured soldiers are quite dangerous as well, because until they're dealt with, they could pose a potential threat to passing by soldiers, which is another story altogether. And then there were men with polearms, spears, pikes. A pike is basically an elongated spear with a specialized head. And throughout history, pikemen could defeat cavalry, archers could defeat pikemen. It was in the early medieval ages, it was spears and axes. Then the main focus was shifted to cavalry, heavy cavalry, or more accurately knights. And then towards the later medieval period, it shifted back towards spears. The Scottish, under the command of Robert the Bruce, had a unique type of formation. It's basically a circle a large circle of men with their spears pointed outward. That could be a whole highly mobile unit. Cavalry couldn't touch them. And you have 2 or 3 ranks of pikemen secured in a position. Cavalry cannot approach, because no man wants to risk his horse. Because a knight without a horse is just a highly professional footman. It's on the horse where the knight shines. Of course, knights were trained in a variety of different weapons and fighting on foot or on horse. And as some people may have guessed, medieval battles were chaotic things, much like this video. Regardless if you had 5,000 or 500,000 men, there's always a chance of victory and there's always a chance of defeat. Because a siege is pitched. The men inside aren't going anywhere. But on a battle, depending on the terrain, you've got all that place to maneuver. Of course, a smart commander would position his army in place where the enemy could not outflank him. But if he did that, he would be in a difficult position to retreat, which is another different story entirely. And once again, numbers don't always win a battle. If you, say, get inside a mountain pass where there's steep cliffs or steep hills on every side of the pass, well, you just position archers on the sides of the pass and have like either a shield wall or a formation of spear or pikemen on the pass. Your enemy is not going anywhere for a good long while, much like what the Spartans did at Thermopylae, but that's another story entirely. And this video is getting close to 18 minutes, so I should wrap it up. So that's like crash course in medieval battles. And I suppose I could talk a bit of the armor they had of today. And before you go thinking that every medieval warrior was clad entirely in plate armor, know that armor was expensive back then. In the earlier medieval ages, in the earlier medieval period known as the Dark Ages, men basically had thick padded cloth and leather. No, not leather, but padded cloth. I will make another video about medieval armor throughout the ages, because some people might be interested in that. And hopefully in the future I'll make a video with me showing off my entire Ringfitter guard, which is a pair of medieval looking boots that are slightly uncomfortable, relatively high too. Well, they're just big boots. And then there's an uncomfortable pair of leggings that really get moist when there's a lot of heat and I'm sweating. And there's a extremely comfortable white under tunic that is made out of linen, faux linen, I believe, fake linen. It's extremely comfortable. Barely feels like I'm wearing it. And then on my arms, I have a leather bracer on each arm that basically covers this portion of the arm, most like up to here, roughly. It's more for show than for actual usage in combat. Then I have my leather breastplate And then I have a belt with a small pouch. It's relatively small, but will be big enough to hold keys, wallet, and cell phone. And then on the left side, I have a sword frog. It's basically like a lever handle, roughly this shape, roughly this big, just to hold the basic foam sword in it. And then on the back, I have a cloak from another store. I'll talk about that more later when I have a cameraman to show the entirety of the garb. Okay, that should do it. Auf Wiedersehen.